The city was awake long before the sun touched its rooftops. Stone streets echo with the sound of carts rolling over uneven ground, merchants calling out their prices, and footsteps moving with purpose. Life in ancient Rome was loud, busy, and full of energy. People believed they were living in the center of the world, a place where power and order ruled everything. But even in a place like this, something felt off. At first, no one could clearly explain it. It was not a war, not a riot, not even a public crime that people could point to. It was quieter than that. It lived in whispers and rumors that passed from one person to another in crowded markets and dimly lit taverns. Someone had died. That was not unusual. Death was part of daily life. People fell sick, accidents happened, and sometimes violence broke out. But this felt different. The body had been found in a narrow alley, away from the main road. There were no signs of struggle that anyone could easily see, no loud witness who had heard anything. It was as if the person had simply been there one moment and gone the next. Most people moved on quickly. There was work to be done, families to care for, and problems that felt closer to home. One death, especially one without answers, did not stop the rhythm of the city. But then it happened again. A few days later, another body was found. This time, it was farther away, near a quiet corner where fewer people passed. Once again, there were no clear signs of what had happened. No one claimed to have seen anything. No one could explain it. Some said it was bad luck. Others whispered about curses or angry spirits. Rome was full of beliefs, and when something could not be explained, people often turned to the unseen. Still, something about these deaths didn't sit right with one man. He was not the loudest voice in the city. He did not stand in public squares making speeches or drawing attention to himself. He worked quietly, observing more than speaking. While others rushed through their days, he paid attention to small details, the kind most people ignored. When he heard about the second death, he did not dismiss it. Instead, he went to see the place for himself. The alley was narrow and shaded. Even during the day, the walls on both sides felt close, almost suffocating. He walked slowly, looking at the ground, the walls, the space where the body had been found. There was nothing obvious, no weapon left behind, no clear mark that told a story. But there was a feeling. He could not explain it, but something about the scene felt planned, not random, not chaotic. It was too quiet, too clean. He had seen many kinds of incidents before. Fights, robberies, accidents. Those scenes were messy. They told a story through broken objects, scattered items, and signs of struggle. This was different. This felt controlled. As he stood there, he began to ask questions. Who was the victim? Where had they come from? Who had seen them last? The answers were simple, but they did not lead anywhere useful. The person had lived an ordinary life. No known enemies. No recent conflicts. It was as if they had been chosen for no reason at all. That thought stayed with him. Over the next few days, he kept hearing small bits of information. Another person missing. A strange sighting late at night. A neighbor who thought they heard something but could not be sure. None of it was enough to alarm the authorities. Rome was too big, too busy. Small incidents like these were easy to ignore. But he did not ignore them. He started keeping track. Not on paper, but in his mind. Locations, times, details about each person. He noticed how the places were different, yet somehow similar. Quiet areas, less crowded paths, spots where someone could act without being seen. And then another body was found. This time, the reaction was different. People began to talk more openly. Fear, which had been hiding beneath the surface, started to grow. Shop owners closed earlier than usual. Families made sure their loved ones returned home before dark. Even in the busiest parts of the city, there was a new kind of tension. Still, the officials hesitated. They did not see a clear connection. To them, these were separate incidents. Unfortunate, yes, but not linked. Without proof, there was no reason to create panic. But the man who had been watching quietly saw something they did not. A pattern. It was not obvious. It was not something you could point to in a single moment. But when he stepped back and looked at everything together, it became clearer. These were not random deaths. Someone was choosing these places. Someone was choosing these moments. Someone was doing this on purpose. The idea itself felt strange, almost impossible. In that time, people did not think in terms of someone killing again and again in a planned way. Violence was often immediate, emotional, or tied to clear motives like revenge or theft. This was different. This felt patient, careful, intentional. He knew that if he spoke too soon, no one would listen. Without strong evidence, his thoughts would sound like imagination. So he continued to observe, to gather small pieces of truth that others overlooked. He visited each location again, walking the same paths the victims might have taken. He watched how people moved through those areas. He noticed where shadows fell as the sun moved across the sky. He paid attention to who came and went. Most people were just living their lives. But every now and then, he would see someone who lingered too long, someone who seemed to be watching rather than moving. He did not jump to conclusions. He simply remembered. Days turned into weeks, and the city changed in subtle ways. The laughter in the streets felt less free. Conversations often turned to the same question: what was happening? Some blamed outsiders. Others blamed fate. A few even suggested that the gods were angry. But deep down, many people felt the truth without being able to say it. Something human was behind this. One evening, as the sun began to set and the city shifted into its quieter hours, he stood at the edge of another narrow street. He had come there because of a small detail he had noticed earlier. Something about the location felt too familiar. As he looked around, the pieces started to fit together more clearly. The spacing between the places, the timing of incidents, the types of victims. It was not random at all. It was a path. Whoever was responsible was moving through the city in a way that made sense to them, a pattern only they fully understood. For the first time, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. This was not going to stop on its own. He knew he had to act. But acting was not simple. In a city like Rome, making claims without strong proof could be dangerous. It could damage reputations, create panic, and even put him at risk. He needed more than suspicion. He needed something solid. So he made a decision. He would get closer, not recklessly, not carelessly, but step by step. He would place himself in the spaces where these things were happening. He would watch more closely, listen more carefully, and trust his instincts. Because now he was certain of one thing. There was a mind behind all of this. A quiet, hidden mind that moved through the same streets as everyone else. A person who blended in, who looked normal, who could pass by without raising suspicion. And that was what made it so dangerous. The city continued to move, as it always had. Carts rolled, merchants shouted, and life carried on. But beneath that normal rhythm, something had changed. An invisible tension stretched across the streets. And somewhere within it, the one responsible was still out there, watching, waiting, and possibly planning what would come next. The city no longer felt the same. Even when the sun was high and the streets were full, there was a quiet unease that followed people everywhere. Conversations had changed. Where people once spoke about trade, family, and daily life, they now spoke in lower voices, often glancing around before finishing their sentences. Another body had been found. This time, the news spread faster than before. It did not stay in one part of the city. It moved quickly through markets, workshops, and homes. People who had never cared about earlier rumors were now paying attention. Something was wrong, and it was becoming harder to ignore. The man who had been quietly observing everything felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. When he heard the news, he did not rush. He had learned that rushing often meant missing important details. Instead, he walked with purpose, keeping his thoughts steady as he made his way to the location. It was near a place that had once been busy during the day, but turned quiet as evening came. The kind of place where people passed through, but few stayed. He stopped at a distance first. He watched. A few officials stood nearby, speaking in serious tones. Some citizens lingered, trying to catch a glimpse, but most kept their distance. Fear had started to teach people caution. When he finally stepped closer, he noticed the same thing he had seen before. No chaos, no clear signs of struggle. It was as if the moment had been controlled, planned, and completed without drawing attention. He looked around slowly, taking in every detail. The walls, the ground, the nearby paths. His eyes followed the route someone could take to enter and leave without being seen. And once again, it made sense. Too much sense. This was not chance. This was someone who understood the city. Someone who knew when and where to act. As he stepped away from the scene, his mind began connecting everything more clearly than before. He replayed each incident, each location, each small detail he had stored in his memory. The pattern was no longer just a feeling. It was real. The space in between the events was not random. There was time in between, as if the person responsible was waiting, watching, choosing carefully before acting again. The locations formed a loose path across the city. Not in a straight line, but not scattered either. It was controlled movement. And the victims, they were not connected by family or trade, but they shared something else. They were alone. Each one had been in a place where they were separated from others, even if only for a short time. It was as if someone was looking for moments of isolation, moments where no one would notice anything unusual. He stopped walking. That thought stayed with him longer than the others. Whoever was behind this was not acting out of anger or desperation. There was no rush, no panic. It was careful, calm. That made it more dangerous. He knew he could not keep this to himself any longer. For the first time, he decided to speak to the authorities. The meeting did not go as he had hoped. The room was filled with men who were used to dealing with clear problems. Theft, disputes, public disturbances, things that had obvious causes and solutions. They listened as he explained what he had observed, but their expressions remained uncertain. You are connecting things that may not be connected. One of them said, "These are separate incidents." Another added, "Unfortunate, yes, but not unusual in a city this large." He tried to remain calm. He explained the pattern again, more carefully this time. The spacing, the locations, the victims being alone. For a moment, there was silence. Then someone shook their head. "There is no proof of a single person doing all of this," they said. "Without proof, we cannot create fear among the people." That word, fear, hung in the air. It was clear what they were worried about. If the idea spread that someone was moving through the city, choosing victims and acting without being seen, panic could follow. And panic was something they wanted to avoid at all costs. The man left the meeting with a quiet frustration. He understood their position, but he also knew they were wrong. Or at least, they were not seeing what he was seeing. As he stepped back into the busy street, the noise of the city returned around him, but it felt distant, as if he were separated from it by something invisible. He was on his own. That realization did not stop him. If anything, it made him more determined. Over the next few days, he changed his approach. Instead of only visiting places after something had happened, he began to spend time in areas where he believed something might happen next. He walked through quiet streets at different times of day. He stood in the shadows, watching how people moved. He listened to conversations, picking up small pieces of information that others ignored. Most of what he saw was normal. People going about their lives, unaware of the danger that might be near. But every now and then, something stood out, a figure standing still for too long. Someone watching instead of moving, a person who seemed to appear in different places, without a clear reason. He did not confront anyone. Not yet, he simply observed. One evening, as the sky turned darker and the city began to quiet down, he found himself near another narrow path. It was a kind of place he had come to recognize. Slightly hidden, not completely isolated, but quiet enough for something to happen unnoticed. He leaned against a wall, pretending to rest, but his eyes remained alert. Time passed slowly. People walked by in small numbers. A few exchanged greetings. Others kept to themselves. Nothing seemed unusual. And then something shifted. It was not a sound or a movement that others would notice. It was a feeling, the same feeling he had experienced at the other locations. He straightened slightly, his attention sharpening. A person moved at the far end of the path. There was nothing immediately suspicious about them. Their clothing was ordinary. Their pace was steady. But there was something about the way they moved, calm, controlled, almost too careful. He watched closely as the figure passed through the space, disappearing into another street. For a moment, he considered following, but he stopped himself. He did not have enough. Not yet. Still, That moment stayed with him. It was the closest he had come to seeing something real, something connected. That night, he could not rest easily. His mind replayed the scene again and again. The movement, the timing, the feeling. He knew he was getting closer, but he also knew something else. If he was getting closer to the truth, then the person behind all of this was still out there, still moving, still planning. And the next moment could come at any time. The city continued to change. People began to adjust their routines. Fewer walked alone at night. Friends stayed together longer. Doors were closed earlier. Fear was no longer hidden. It had become part of daily life. Yet, even with all these changes, the one responsible remained unseen. That was what made it worse. It was not just the acts themselves, but the silence around them, the absence of answers, the feeling that someone could be watching, blending into the crowd, passing by without being noticed. The man stood once again in a quiet part of the city, looking out at the streets that stretched in every direction. He no longer doubted what he believed. There was a pattern. There was a person behind it. And somewhere within the movement of the city, that person was still there, waiting for the next moment. And now, more than ever, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The nights in the city had grown quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was a kind of silence that made people listen more closely to every small sound. A distant footstep, a door closing, even the wind brushing past walls. Everything felt heavier than before. The man had started to notice how people avoided eye contact now. In crowded areas, they still moved around each other, but there was less trust in their expressions. It was as if everyone carried the same question inside them, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Who was responsible? He walked through the streets with steady steps, but his thoughts were far from calm. The pattern he had been tracking was no longer something he doubted. It was real, and it was growing clearer with every passing day. But something else had begun to change. Until now, the story had been about places and moments, about quiet corners and careful timing. But recently, new whispers had started to spread. Whispers about a person. At first, he dismissed them. Rumors were common, especially in times of fear. People often created stories to explain what they did not understand. But these whispers were different. They came from different parts of the city, from people who had no connection to each other. And yet, they all described something similar. A figure who seemed ordinary. Someone who did not stand out. Someone who could easily be forgotten. That detail troubled him more than anything else. He began to follow these whispers, not blindly, but with the same careful attention he had used from the beginning. He spoke to people in markets, listened to quiet conversations in corners, and paid attention to stories that others ignored. Piece by piece, something started to form. There were mentions of someone who visited certain areas more than once, but never stayed long. A person who spoke politely, kept their distance, and never gave anyone a reason to remember them. It was a strange kind of presence, visible, yet invisible at the same time. The man knew that if this was true, it explained everything. The lack of witnesses, the absence of clear signs, the ability to move without drawing attention. Whoever was behind this understood people just as well as they understood the city. One afternoon, while the streets were still filled with movement, he sat near a small gathering place where travelers often stopped. It was the kind of place where stories were exchanged freely, especially by those who had little reason to stay silent. He listened quietly as two individuals spoke nearby. "I saw someone," one of them said softly. "Not do anything wrong, just standing there." "What was strange about that?" the other asked. "It wasn't what they were doing. It was how they were watching." The man leaned slightly closer, careful not to draw attention. "What do you mean?" the second voice asked. They weren't looking at one person. They were looking at everyone like they were choosing. A brief silence followed. Then the second voice spoke again, quieter this time. "You think it could be connected?" "I don't know," the first replied, "but it didn't feel right." The man did not interrupt them. He did not ask questions. He simply listened, letting their words settle in his mind. That phrase stayed with him, like they were choosing. As he stood and walked away, he felt a shift in his understanding. Until now, he had been focusing on where and when. But now, He began to think more about why. Why these people? Why these moments? If someone was choosing, then there had to be a reason behind those choices. Not a clear one, not something obvious like wealth or status, but something deeper, something that made sense only to the person making those decisions. That thought led him to a new direction. Instead of only looking at the locations, he began to look more closely at the victims themselves, their routines, their habits, the small details of their lives that might have gone unnoticed before. He discovered something subtle but important. Each of them had moments of routine isolation, not constant loneliness, but short periods where they stepped away from others, a walk taken alone, a quiet task done without company, a path walked at the same time each day. It was as if someone had been watching these routines, learning them, waiting for the right moment. The idea sent a quiet chill through him. This was not random. This was observation. Careful, patient observation. And that meant the person responsible had been present long before anyone realized something was wrong. As the days passed, the city continued to carry its growing tension. But beneath that tension, something else was forming, a quiet awareness. People were starting to notice more. They paid attention to who stood nearby, who lingered, who seemed out of place even in the smallest way. But that awareness came with a problem. When everyone is watching everyone, it becomes harder to see what truly matters. Suspicion spread quickly, often without reason. Innocent people were questioned, followed, even avoided. Fear had begun to blur the line between caution and confusion. The man understood this danger. If the truth became lost in all the noise, then the one responsible would remain hidden. He needed clarity. He needed something real. One evening, as the sky darkened and the city lights began to flicker, he returned to a place he had visited before. It was not the same location as the previous incidents, but it shared the same feeling. Quiet, slightly hidden, easy to pass without notice. He stood there, letting the stillness settle around him. Time moved slowly. Minutes felt longer than they should. And then, once again, he felt it. That same shift. That same quiet signal that something was not right. His eyes moved carefully across the space. And then he saw it. A figure, not too far away, standing near the edge of the path. There was nothing obvious about them. Their posture was relaxed, their presence calm. But their attention was focused, not on one thing, but on everything, just as he had heard before. Watching, observing, choosing. The man remained still, careful not to reveal that he had noticed. For a brief moment, their eyes almost met, and in that moment, he felt something he could not fully explain. Not fear, not anger, but recognition, as if both of them understood, without words, that something had just been discovered. The figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of the city as if they had never been there. The man did not follow. Not yet, but this time was different. This time, he was certain, the whispers were real, the pattern was real, and the person behind it was no longer just an idea. They were out there, moving through the same streets, blending into the same crowds, living among everyone else. As he stood alone in the quiet path, he realized something that changed everything. This was not just about solving a mystery anymore. This was about understanding a mind that did not act in anger or chaos, but in silence and control. And now that he had seen even a small glimpse of it, he knew one thing for sure. He was closer than ever before. And that meant the danger was closer too. The city had reached a point where silence no longer felt safe. Even during the day, when sunlight filled the streets and people moved in large numbers, there was still a feeling that something unseen was always nearby. The usual sound of trade and conversation continued, but they carried a different tone now. Shorter, quieter, more careful. The man walked through the crowd, observing everything as he always had. But now, people were observing too, not in the same careful way, but with nervous eyes and quick glances. It was clear that fear had settled into daily life. The figure he had seen before had not left his thoughts. It was no longer just a pattern of places or a series of events. It was real. There was someone behind all of this, someone who moved like any other person, someone who could stand close without being noticed. And now, the man knew he had to push further. He returned once again to the authorities, but this time his approach was different. He did not speak in ideas or patterns alone. He spoke with confidence, describing what he had seen with his own eyes. There was a shift in the room as he spoke. Some still doubted him, but others listened more carefully than before. The growing fear in the city had made it harder to ignore the possibility that something larger was happening. "You're saying this is one person?" one of them asked. "Yes," he replied calmly. "One person who moves carefully, who watches, who waits." "And you have seen them?" "I have seen enough to know they are real." The room fell quiet. This time, no one dismissed him immediately, but agreement did not come easily either. "If what you say is true," another voice said slowly, "then we are dealing with something we do not fully understand." That was the problem. The system they relied on was built for clear situations. Disputes, theft, open acts of violence. Things that had witnesses, motives, and direct outcomes. This was none of those. This was quiet, hidden, difficult to prove. Still, something had changed. They could no longer ignore him completely. A small effort was made. More guards were placed in certain areas. Patrols became more frequent, especially during the evening hours. It was not a full response, but it was a beginning. For a moment, it seemed like it might help. The streets felt slightly safer. People noticed the presence of guards and allowed themselves a small sense of relief. But the man was not convinced. He understood something that the others did not. This person would not act in a way that was easy to stop. They would adjust. They would wait, and they would choose their moment carefully. Days passed. Nothing happened. No new reports. No new incidents. The city began to breathe again, slowly. Some started to believe that whatever had been happening was over, that the increased presence of guards had worked, that the danger had passed. But the man felt the opposite. The silence did not feel like safety. It felt like preparation. He continued his work quietly, moving through the city at different times, watching, listening, waiting. He noticed something important. The areas where guards were now present had become predictable. Their movements followed patterns. Their presence was strong in certain places, but weak in others, and that created gaps. Gaps that someone observing could see. Gaps that someone patient could use. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the man found himself standing near one of those gaps. It was a place that had not seen much attention from the guards. Quiet, slightly removed from the main paths. He stood there longer than usual. He did not know exactly what he was waiting for, but something told him to stay. The air felt still, the kind of stillness that makes time feel slower. And then it happened. Not a sound, not a sudden movement, but a presence, the same presence he had felt before. He turned his head slightly, careful not to make it obvious. And there it was, the figure, standing at a distance, just far enough to blend into the surroundings, but close enough to watch. Their posture was calm, their attention focused. It was exactly as before. But this time, something was different. The man did not look away. He held his position, letting the moment stretch. For a brief second, everything else seemed to disappear. The noise of the city, the movement of people, even the passing of time. There were only 2 points of awareness. Him and the one watching. Then the figure moved. Not quickly, not nervously, just a simple turn, followed by a steady walk away. The man followed, not too close, not too fast. He kept enough distance to avoid being noticed, but close enough to keep the figure in sight. They moved through narrow paths, turning at corners, passing through areas where people were fewer. It was not random movement. It was familiar, as if the figure knew exactly where to go. The man felt his heartbeat steady, not racing, but focused. This was the closest he had ever been. Step by step he followed, until suddenly the figure was gone. No sudden turn that he could see. No clear direction. Just gone. He stopped, looking around carefully. There were only a few possible paths, but none showed any sign of where the figure had gone. It was as if they had disappeared into the city itself. He stood there for a long moment, letting the reality of it settle in. This was not just someone careful. This was someone who understood movement, timing, and space in a way most people did not. Someone who could vanish without effort. The man returned to the authorities once more, this time with stronger urgency. "I followed them," he said. "And one of them asked. They disappeared. There was a pause. That is not enough, someone replied. It is enough to know we are not ready, he said firmly. The room grew tense. What are you suggesting? That we are thinking about this the wrong way. He stepped forward slightly, his voice steady but serious. We are trying to catch someone using methods meant for open actions. But this person does not act openly. They move quietly, they observe, they wait. And what do you expect us to do? Another voice asked. He took a breath before answering. We need to think like them. The idea was uncomfortable. To understand someone like that meant stepping into a mindset that most people avoided. But it was necessary, because without that understanding, they would always be one step behind. The discussion continued, longer than before. There was still doubt, still hesitation, but also something new. Concern, real concern. The city was no longer just uneasy. It was on edge, and those responsible for its safety were beginning to feel the pressure. Some changes were made. Not large ones, not obvious ones, but small adjustments. Less predictable patrols. More attention to quieter areas. A shift in how they observe movement, rather than just reacting to it. It was a step forward. But the man knew it might not be enough, because the person they were dealing with was not reacting. They were thinking, planning, adapting. As the night settled once again over the city, the man stood alone, looking out at the familiar streets that now felt different in every way. He had come closer than ever before. He had seen the truth, but the truth had also revealed something else. This was not a simple chase. This was a battle of patience. And the one who lost patience first would lose everything. Somewhere in the city, hidden among thousands of faces, the one responsible was still there, still watching, still waiting, and perhaps already preparing for what would come next. The city felt like it was holding its breath. Days passed, and more days, and still there were no new incidents. No reports, no whispers of anything unusual. For many people, this silence began to feel like relief. Shops stayed open a little longer again, and voices slowly grew louder in the streets. But for the man, the silence did not bring comfort. It felt like something unfinished. He had seen enough to know that this was not the kind of thing that simply stopped. The person behind it had shown patience, control, and understanding. Someone like that would not disappear without a reason, and that reason had not revealed itself yet. So he kept moving through the city just as before, watching, listening, learning. But now, there was a new layer to his thoughts. He was no longer just trying to find the person. He was trying to understand them. He thought about the way the figure had moved. Calm, steady, never rushed. He thought about the choices, the places, the timing, the moments of isolation. This was not chaos. This was intention. He began to ask himself a different kind of question. Not where will it happen next, but why did it happen at all? That question led him deeper than before. He started revisiting everything he had learned, but this time, he focused less on the events and more on the meaning behind them. The victims, the locations, the patterns, they all pointed to something, even if it was not obvious. And slowly, something began to form. Whoever was behind this was not acting for attention. There were no messages left behind, no signs meant to be seen. Everything had been done quietly, without drawing notice. That meant something important. The actions were not for others. They were for themselves. That realization changed everything. It meant that even if the city became safer, even if guards were everywhere, the real reason behind these actions would still exist. It would not disappear just because people were watching more closely. The man stood near one of the older parts of the city, where the buildings carried years of history in their worn stone walls. He placed his hand lightly against the surface, feeling the rough texture beneath his fingers. The city had seen so much growth, power, struggle, change. And yet, even here, something like this could exist. Something hidden, something human. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds around him settle. Footsteps, distant voices, the soft movement of air through narrow streets. Somewhere in all of this, the person he had been searching for was still living their life, walking among others, blending in. The thought did not bring fear anymore. It brought clarity. because now he understood something that he had not fully seen before. This was not just about stopping a person. It was about recognizing a truth that even in a place built on order and control, there were parts of human nature that could not be easily understood or contained. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the streets, he made his way toward one of the quiet paths he had visited many times before. Not because he expected something to happen, but because it felt right. The path was empty when he arrived. The air was still, carrying the calm of the evening. He stood there for a long time, saying nothing, doing nothing, simply being present. And in that stillness, his thoughts became clearer than ever. He realized that chasing the person endlessly might not lead to the answer he was searching for, not because it was impossible, but because the answer was not only in catching them. It was in understanding what had already happened. The city had changed. People had changed. Awareness had grown. And even if the one responsible was never fully revealed, their actions had left a mark that would not easily fade. A mark that reminded everyone to look closer, to pay attention, to understand that not everything dangerous announces itself loudly. Some things move in silence. Some things hide in plain sight. A soft sound broke his thoughts. Footsteps. He did not turn immediately. He listened first. The steps were steady, unhurried, familiar. Slowly, he turned his head, and there at the far end of the path stood a figure, still, watching. The same presence, the same calm. For a moment, nothing moved. No words were spoken. No sudden actions. Just two people aware of each other in a quiet space. The man felt no panic, no rush, only a deep sense of understanding. He took a single step forward. The figure did not move. Another step, still nothing. The distance between them remained, but the connection was clear. This was the moment he had been moving toward all this time. Not a chase, not a capture, but a recognition that behind all the silence, all the patterns, all the fear, there was a person, not a shadow, not a rumor, a person. And that truth carried a weight heavier than anything else, because it meant that the line between ordinary and dangerous was thinner than most people believed. The figure tilted slightly, as if considering something. Then, without warning, they turned and walked away. Not quickly, not in fear, just as calmly as before. The man did not follow. This time, he did not need to, because something had changed, not in the figure, but in him. He stood there, watching until the figure disappeared once again into the city. And for the first time, he did not feel like he had lost something. He felt like he had found something, an understanding, not a complete answer, not a clear ending, but something real. The city would continue. People would live their lives, return to their routines, and slowly move past the fear that had once held them tightly. But the memory would remain, not just of what had happened, but of what it revealed, that even in the greatest places, even in the most powerful cities, there are parts of life that remain hidden. And sometimes, the most important truths are not the ones that are solved, but the ones that are understood. As the night settled fully over the city, the man turned and began to walk back through the streets. The sounds of life continued around him, just as they always had. But everything felt different now. Not safer, not more dangerous, just clearer. And somewhere within that same city, the one he had been searching for continued on their path. Unseen, unknown, but no longer unimaginable. And that, in its own quiet way, was the ending he had been moving toward all along. Time moved forward, as it always did. The city slowly returned to something that looked like normal life. Markets grew louder again. Laughter began to sound more natural. People started walking alone, without thinking too much about it. The fear that once lived in every corner did not disappear completely, but it softened, becoming something distant. Most people wanted to believe it was over. They needed to believe that. But the man knew that endings were not always clear. Some things do not end with a final moment. They fade, they shift, they become part of something larger. He continued his walks through the city, but not with the same urgency as before. His steps were calmer now, more thoughtful. He was no longer chasing something. He was observing what remained after everything that had happened. What remained was not just memory. It was change. He noticed it in small ways. People looked at each other a little longer before turning away. Shop owners paid more attention to who entered and who left. Even in busy places, there was a quiet awareness that had not existed before. It was as if the city had learned something, even if it could not fully explain what it had learned. One afternoon, he sat near a public space where many people gathered. Children moved freely, their laughter filling the air. Older individuals sat nearby, talking about simple things, enjoying the calm. It looked peaceful, and in many ways it was. But as he watched, he realized that peace now carried a deeper meaning. It was no longer taken for granted. It was noticed, appreciated, protected in small ways. He thought back to everything that had happened, the first whispers, the confusion, the growing fear, the moments of clarity, and finally, the understanding. Not an answer, but something close to it. He had never caught the person. He had never stood in front of them and demanded the truth. And yet, he did not feel like he had failed, because what he had found was something different. He had seen how easily something hidden could exist in plain sight, how a person could move through the same streets, share the same spaces, and still remain unknown. That realization stayed with him more than anything else. It was not about one person anymore. It was about understanding the nature of people, that everyone carries thoughts, feelings, and parts of themselves that others may never see. Most of those parts are harmless. Some are not, and the difference is not always visible. As the sun began to lower in the sky, he stood and began walking again. His path took him through familiar streets, past places that had once been part of the pattern he had followed so closely. They looked ordinary now, just streets, just paths. Nothing about them showed what had once happened there, and yet he could still feel it, not in a fearful way, but as a reminder that every place holds stories, even when those stories are not seen. He stopped at one of the quieter paths, the same kind of place where everything had once felt tense and uncertain. Now it was empty, calm, still. He stood there for a while, letting the silence settle around him. This time, the silence felt different. It was not heavy. It was not waiting. It was simply there. And in that stillness, he understood something important. He had spent so much time looking outward, trying to find something hidden in the world around him. But the real understanding had come from within, from the way he had learned to see, to notice, to think beyond what was obvious. That was the change that mattered most, not just in him, but in the city as well. Even those who did not know the full story had felt something shift. They had become more aware, more present, more connected to the idea that life was not always as simple as it seemed. He began walking again, moving without a clear destination. The city moved with him, alive in its own rhythm. At one point, he passed by a group of people speaking quietly. He did not intend to listen, but few words reached him as he walked by. "It just stopped," one voice said. "Yes," another replied, as if it was never there. He continued walking, but those words stayed with him, as if it was never there. That was how most people would remember it. Something that came, disturbed the peace, and then disappeared. But he knew better. It had been real. It had changed things, even if those changes were not always visible. As night began to fall, lights appeared one by one across the city. The familiar glow returned, bringing a sense of comfort to those who saw it. He walked toward a higher part of the city, where he could look out over the rooftops. From there, everything seemed calm, orderly, peaceful. It was easy to believe that nothing had ever been wrong. But he knew that beneath that calm surface, there was depth, layers of experience, memory, and understanding that could not be seen from a distance. He stood there for a long time, looking out at the city, not searching, not waiting, just observing. And in that moment, he felt something he had not felt since the beginning of all this. Stillness, not the kind that comes from silence alone, but the kind that comes from acceptance. He had done what he could. He had followed the truth as far as it could take him, and what remained was not a mystery that needed solving, but a reality that needed understanding. Some questions do not have clear answers. Some stories do not have clear endings, but that does not make them meaningless. If anything, it makes them more real. As he turned to leave, he took one last look at the city. Somewhere within it, the person he had once searched for was still living their life. That fact no longer filled him with urgency. It filled him with awareness. Because now, he understood something that many people never do. That the world is not divided into simple lines of known and unknown. There's always something in between. Something quiet. Something hidden. Something human. And as he walked away, disappearing into the same streets as everyone else, he carried that understanding with him, not as a burden, but as a truth, a quiet truth that would stay with him long after the city had forgotten everything else. The city had changed, though no one said it aloud. Life moved on. Streets grew crowded again, and the markets rang with the sounds of haggling and laughter. On the surface, everything looked normal, yet beneath the ordinary, a subtle shift had taken place. People moved differently, their steps cautious yet deliberate, their eyes scanning a little longer than before. The man noticed this as he walked among them, quietly observing, as he had done for months. He had not stopped searching, though the urgency that had once driven him had softened. Now, he was not chasing shadows or following whispers. He moved through the city with the intention of seeing and understanding the patterns that remained. He had learned that knowing the truth did not always mean catching it. Sometimes it meant recognizing it and carrying that knowledge carefully. As the sun lowered and painted the rooftops with gold, he found himself near an old bridge that arched over the river. The water below flowed steadily, reflecting the colors of the evening sky. He often came here to think, because the city's noise softened in this place, replaced by the constant, gentle movement of the river. He sat on the edge of the bridge, letting his feet hang above the water. His mind wandered over everything that had happened. He thought about the people who had whispered about the figure, about the ones who had gone unnoticed, and about the subtle signs that had led him closer than anyone else had been. He realized that in many ways, the city itself had been a part of the story, guiding him, concealing things, and teaching lessons he could never have learned otherwise. A light breeze carried the faint scent of smoke from distant hearths. Somewhere below, children's laughter floated up, mingling with the cries of market vendors closing their shops for the day. It was ordinary and mundane, yet he saw in it a kind of resilience. Life continued despite the unseen forces that had moved through the city, shaping it quietly. He remembered the first moment he had felt something was wrong, the whisper of a presence he could not yet see, how it had grown into a pattern, into something that could not be ignored, and how, over time, he had learned not only to track the movements but to feel the weight of human complexity, the quiet strength and the hidden darkness that lived in people. That thought stayed with him, pressing gently but insistently. He realized that what had driven him was not just a need to uncover the figure, but a deeper desire to understand invisible threads that connected human actions to unseen intentions. Footsteps echoed softly behind him, and he turned slightly, though not fully, to acknowledge the possibility of someone approaching, but was only a passerby, moving quickly with purpose, and yet unaware of the weight of history in that place. The man watched as they disappeared down the street, and returned his gaze to the flowing water. The bridge had always felt like a place of perspective, a spot where he could see the city as a whole, and also notice the smallest details. He noticed the way the lanterns reflected on the river, flickering like distant stars caught in water, the way the shadows of the buildings stretched across the streets, creating patterns that shifted as the light changed, the way people moved in small groups, their interactions ordinary yet intricate, like threads in a vast, unspoken design. And then he thought of the figure again, the one who had moved among the city unnoticed, whose presence had shaped so much of what had happened. He realized that understanding that person was not just about observing their actions. It was about understanding the environment that allowed them to exist, the human tendencies they had counted on, and the choices they had made to remain unseen. This understanding was unsettling in its clarity. It revealed that life contained spaces where ordinary people could be unaware of forces moving around them, spaces where subtle actions could ripple outward, shaping the experiences of many without being noticed. He rose slowly from the bridge and began walking toward the older parts of the city, where the narrow streets wound between tall buildings. The air here was cooler, carrying the smell of stone, wood, and the faint tang of the river. Here, the city's history was written in every wall, every corner, every arch. As he moved, He reflected on what he had learned about human nature. Fear could make people hyper-aware or blind them entirely. Curiosity could lead to understanding or obsession. Patience could reveal truths or allow dangers to grow unnoticed. And most importantly, he realized that knowledge alone did not always protect people. It required interpretation, empathy, and a willingness to accept complexity. He stopped briefly at a quiet square, where a single lantern lit the cobblestones. The shadows stretched long and dark across the ground, making the space feel both intimate and immense at once. He crouched slightly to observe the play of light and shadow, thinking about how similar patterns had appeared in the movements he had tracked months ago, how the figure had always found ways to blend, to disappear, to use the ordinary as camouflage. A soft wind carried voices from a nearby tavern. They were laughing, arguing lightly, sharing stories. He smiled faintly. Even in the midst of fear and mystery, life continued. People adapted, learned, and carried on, often without realizing the ways in which the city and its hidden currents shaped them. He wandered further into the streets, his steps quiet, his eyes alert yet patient. He did not expect to see the figure again, nor did he seek confrontation. He understood now that some truths are not about capture or resolution. They are about awareness, reflection, and the quiet acknowledgement of realities that exist whether people see them or not. As night fully descended, lanterns glowed in every window and alleyway. Shadows moved gently with the flickering light, creating illusions of motion where there was none. The city breathed with a rhythm all its own, steady and persistent. He paused in the middle of an intersection, looking in all directions. The street seemed ordinary, but he knew better. Beneath the surface, there were movements, choices, and hidden presences he could feel if he focused. It was a subtle awareness that required no words, only attention. And in that moment, he understood one final truth. The figure had been real. The actions had been real. The fear, the confusion, the whispers, they had been real. But more than that, the city itself had been alive in the story. Every person, every corner, every quiet observation had played a role, whether they knew it or not. He began walking again, slowly, moving back toward the river. The water reflected the lights and shadows of the night, reminding him that life always carries reflections of what has been, even if they are not immediately visible. As he walked, he thought about the people he had observed, the lessons he had learned, and the understanding he now carried. He realized that sometimes the greatest stories are not the ones with neat endings. They are the ones that leave traces in the world and the people who witness them. The figure would continue to exist in the city, unnoticed by most, understood by few. But that was no longer a source of fear for him. It was a reminder of the layers of human experience, of the choices that shape life quietly, and of the resilience of those who live amidst the unknown. He stopped on a small hill overlooking the city. The lights twinkled like stars, and the river cut through it like a silver ribbon. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. Everything was calm, yet charged with subtle energy, the energy of lives lived, secrets kept, and understanding gained. He knew he would continue walking, observing, and learning, not because he was chasing a person anymore, but because he had come to understand the value of paying attention, of recognizing patterns, and of holding awareness gently, like a fragile object. The city slept, unaware of the lessons carried by one man who had seen what others had not. Yet it thrived, as all cities do, with ordinary people moving through extraordinary currents, often without realizing it. And he walked on, quietly, confidently, carrying the knowledge that some stories do not end. They continue in subtle ways, shaping the present and future, leaving marks in the lives of those who notice, and in the memory of the city itself. That night, the man vanished into the streets once more, blending seamlessly into life around him, just as the figure he had sought had done all along. But he carried something deeper than mere observation. He carried understanding, and that was a power no one could take away. The city woke slowly under the first light of dawn. The streets were quiet, empty in ways that made every sound carry further than usual. Birds called from the rooftops, their songs sharp and clear in the morning air. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, curling into the pale sky. For most, it was the start of an ordinary day. For him, it was another chance to watch, to think, and to reflect on everything that had happened in the months before. He moved through the city calmly, choosing paths that were less crowded. The early light cast long shadows, making familiar streets seem unfamiliar for a moment. He noticed the small details: a shop door slightly ajar, a piece of cloth fluttering from a balcony, the way sunlight touched the uneven cobblestones. Each of these things, he realized, carried a quiet story of its own, small movements that shaped the life of the city as much as the actions of its people. He paused near an empty square, letting his gaze settle on the worn fountain at its center. The water moved steadily, unchanging, even as the world around it shifted. He thought about the figure he had followed so many times, the one who had moved quietly through the city, unseen and almost unknowable. It had been a long journey to reach understanding, and yet he realized there was always more to see. For the first time, he tried not to think about the figure as something to find. Instead, he imagined the figure as a part of the city itself, an invisible presence woven into the daily lives of everyone who moved through these streets. The thought brought a strange comfort. It was not fear that remained, but awareness, a clear understanding that the world was more complex than appearances suggested. As he walked, he observed the people beginning their routines. Merchants opened their shops, carefully arranging their goods. Children ran between the streets, laughing and shouting, unaware of the hidden currents around them. Older citizens moved with deliberate steps, their faces calm but alert, shaped by experience. Every movement, every glance, every choice, he realized, was connected to the larger story of the city in subtle ways. He stopped near one narrow alley, a place that had once felt ominous and heavy. Now it was quiet and ordinary. He could feel the history of tension that had passed through it, the whispers and fears. But they no longer held power over him. They were lessons, not threats. He took a step inside, letting the shadow of the alley stretch across him. There was a rhythm to the city, he thought, a rhythm that most people never noticed. Patterns of movement, patterns of thought, even patterns of fear and hope, all of it moved through the streets quietly. And sometimes, someone like the figure he had been following could move along those patterns without disrupting them, almost like water flowing through cracks in stone. He walked further, letting the early sun warm his shoulders. The shops became busier as the morning progressed, and the streets filled with the ordinary sounds of life. He noticed that even though the city appeared unchanged, something fundamental had shifted. People had become more careful, more aware, without knowing why. Even those who had not experienced the fear directly had adapted in small ways, their actions shaped by an invisible lesson. He paused at a corner where two streets met, watching as a young woman carefully stepped around a puddle, adjusting her bag so nothing fell. The small action struck him as meaningful, a reminder that attention to small things could matter, sometimes more than grand gestures. And in that simple observation, he understood a truth he had been moving toward all along. Life is made of small moments, and noticing them is a key to understanding the larger patterns. A soft breeze carried voices from a nearby tavern. Laughter, conversation, and the clinking of dishes reached him. He smiled faintly. Even in a city that had seen something extraordinary and unsettling, life continued. People adapted, moved on, and yet remained connected in ways that were often invisible. He continued walking, exploring streets that had once been the center of fear. Now, they were ordinary again, yet he could feel the echoes of the past events, not in a threatening way, but as a quiet memory that informed the present. Every building, every corner, every shadow held a story, and he was learning to read them without needing to chase anything further. He stopped near a small square where the sun now touched the fountain, making the water sparkle like liquid gold. He thought about how easily ordinary life could be disrupted, and how delicate the balance of perception and awareness truly was. The figure had moved quietly through the city, shaping the experiences of many, without anyone fully realizing it. And yet, the city had endured, as it always did, adapting in subtle, human ways. The realization brought him peace. He understood that the story was not just about one person, one series of events, or even one fear. It was about life itself, how ordinary people navigate the unknown, how small actions carry weight, and how awareness shapes the experience of living. He walked further, past streets bathed in sunlight, through arches and over bridges, noticing every detail with a careful attention he had developed over months. A merchant set out fresh bread. A child dropped a small toy. A dog barked in the distance. All ordinary events, yet each carried a hidden rhythm, a reflection of human life in its simplest form. By midday, the city was alive and full, and he found himself in a quieter area, near the edge of the city where the buildings were older and the streets narrower. The shadows here were long, and the air carried the scent of earth and stone. He paused again, reflecting on the lessons of patience, observation, and understanding that had shaped his journey. It was then that he noticed something small, almost imperceptible, a movement in the corner of his eye, subtle and deliberate. He turned slowly, expecting nothing, and saw the briefest glimpse of a figure slipping through the shadows, moving as fluidly as water. For a moment, his heart beat faster, not in fear, but in recognition. He did not follow. He understood now that pursuit was not always the goal. Recognition, awareness, and understanding were the real measures of success. The figure would continue to exist in the city, a hidden presence shaping the ordinary in quiet ways. And that was enough. He continued walking, letting the streets guide him. Each step was thoughtful, measured, and attentive. He passed by familiar corners and alleys, noting how ordinary they seemed now, yet carrying the memory of what had once occurred there. The city had healed, but had also grown more aware, more nuanced, and more resilient. As the sun began its descent, painting the city in gold and amber, he reached a high point overlooking the rooftops. The river glittered in the light, and the streets moved below like threads in a vast, living tapestry. He felt a deep sense of connection, not to a person, but to the rhythm of the city, to the stories that unfolded in every movement, every glance, and every choice. He understood that some stories do not have endings in the way people expect. They leave traces, shape perception, and teach lessons that unfold over time. The figure, the fear, the whispers, all were part of a larger narrative, one that included every person, every street, and every moment in the city. As night approached, lanterns flickered to life, casting soft light across the cobblestones. Shadows moved gently with the glow, creating a dance of light and dark. He walked through the streets calmly, blending with the city, aware of the subtle energies that moved around him. He realized that the most important truths are often quiet, hidden, and unnoticed. They exist in patience, in observation, in the willingness to see the ordinary in extraordinary ways. And carrying that awareness was more valuable than any capture, any confrontation, or any sudden revelation. By the time the city settled fully into night, he had returned to the riverbank, sitting again where he could watch the water flow. The moon reflected on the surface, soft and steady, reminding him of continuity, resilience, and the unseen patterns that shape life. He knew that life would continue. People would move through their days, and hidden presences would exist alongside them. The city had learned something, and so had he. Not a complete answer, not a resolved mystery, but a deeper understanding of life, human nature, and the quiet truths that shape the world. As he rose and walked away into the streets, disappearing into the ordinary flow of life, he carried with him something more lasting than fear or obsession. He carried knowledge, awareness, and acceptance, the understanding that some stories do not end but live on quietly, shaping everything in ways that are felt more than seen. The city moved in a rhythm that most people could not see, a rhythm made up of small actions, quiet observations, and subtle shifts. Early in the morning, he walked through streets that were slowly waking. The sun had not yet fully risen, and a soft light spread across the rooftops, touching the worn stones of the alleys and the edges of the buildings. Everything looked ordinary, yet he felt the weight of the past events lingering in the air. He moved deliberately, not in a hurry, let his eyes notice what others passed by without thought. A merchant arranging pottery on a stand, the faint flutter of a curtain in an upstairs window, a bird taking flight with sudden rush. Each detail mattered. It reminded him that life was composed of countless small moments, each one carrying its own quiet significance. The city had healed in appearance, but he knew it carried invisible scars. Not physical, not obvious, but etched into the memory of the people and the rhythm of daily life. He thought about the figure who had moved silently through the city a month ago, leaving an invisible mark on those who had felt the subtle tension and on those who had never noticed at all. The figure was gone from sight, yet their presence remained woven into the city's fabric. He paused near a bridge that arched over the river. The water below moved steadily, reflecting the pale light of dawn. He rested his hands on the railing, thinking about the lessons the city had quietly taught him. Patience, observation, and understanding were not just tools. They were ways of seeing the world as it truly was. From this height, he could see the city stretching out before him, rooftops stacked together, streets winding in complicated patterns, and the flow of people moving as if guided by unseen hands. It was easy to believe that life was simple, but he knew better. The complexity lay in what people could not see, the movements, intentions, and choices that shaped every day without notice. He walked again, moving toward a quiet square where a fountain bubbled softly. The sound of water brought a sense of calm, a counterpoint to the hidden tensions that had once run through these streets. Children began to arrive, chasing each other with shouts and laughter. Older citizens followed, walking slowly, speaking softly. The ordinary rhythm of life had returned, yet it carried an undercurrent of awareness, a trace of the lessons the city had endured. As he moved, he observed the interactions of people around him. A shopkeeper bowed slightly to a customer. A young man helped a child step over a puddle. A pair of women spoke in low voices, sharing a story he would never hear. Each action, though small, was part of a larger pattern. Each choice reflected the unseen forces that shaped the city's life. He paused under an archway where shadows stretched across the cobblestones. He remembered how the figure had once used these same shadows, blending into the ordinary, unseen yet present. It was a reminder that visibility is not always what matters. What is important often moves quietly, influencing outcomes without drawing attention. The thought lingered as he walked through winding streets, past familiar corners that had once seemed ominous. Now, they were ordinary, but he could feel the memory of what had passed, not in a threatening way, but as a subtle awareness. History lived quietly, even when people did not acknowledge it. He stopped near a small shop where the door was open, letting in light and air. The smell of baked bread mixed with the faint scent of herbs and wood smoke. He watched as the shopkeeper arranged fresh goods on the shelves. Every movement was careful, deliberate, but also ordinary. Yet to him, every detail carried meaning. It was proof that life continued, shaped by choice and awareness, even in the midst of unseen currents. The sun climbed higher, and the city became busier. Market stalls appeared, children ran between streets, and citizens moved through their routines. He noticed patterns emerging naturally. The way people avoided collisions, the way they responded to small obstacles, the way their attention shifted subtly from one moment to the next. The city was alive, moving as a single organism composed of countless small decisions. He thought about the figure again, not as a person to chase, but as an idea, a presence woven into the ordinary, shaping the unnoticed. That understanding brought him peace. It was no longer necessary to find a figure or confront them. Recognition and awareness were enough. The city had carried the lessons, and so had he. As afternoon approached, he moved to a quieter area near the city walls. The streets were narrower here, and the shadows of tall buildings created pockets of shade that shifted slowly with the sun. He paused to observe a small garden tucked between two homes. The plants grew quietly, tended carefully, yet without attention from most passers-by. It was a reminder that care and awareness could exist in hidden places, unnoticed yet vital. A dog barked in the distance, and the sound carried softly across the street. A young woman stepped over a small stream of water, adjusting her bag, a child following behind her. Ordinary moments, yet full of life, full of human intent. He realized that the ordinary contained as much depth as the extraordinary, and often more. He continued walking, passing through streets that had once been scenes of tension. Now, they carried the ordinary rhythms of life, but he could feel the subtle traces left by past events. Awareness had shifted, and life had adapted. People moved with caution yet confidence, carrying the lessons of the invisible in their choices and actions. He reached a small square where a fountain reflected the late afternoon sun. The water glimmered, moving steadily, calmly. He sat on the edge, letting the noise of the city settle around him. He thought about the months of observation, the patience it had required, and the understanding it had brought. What had seemed chaotic at first had revealed patterns, intentions, and a deeper truth about human behavior and resilience. Nearby, Children played, laughing and chasing each other. A man guided a cart full of goods across the square, careful to avoid the puddles and the crowd. The ordinary continued, shaped subtly by what had come before, yet carrying on without fear. It was proof that the city, like life, adapted, learned, and survived. He rose and walked toward the river, where the water flowed under the fading light. The city stretched out along its banks, buildings reflected in the surface, lanterns beginning to glow softly as evening approached. He paused on a small bridge, looking down at the water. The currents moved steadily, unaffected by the chaos that had once passed through the streets above. He understood now that life carried on not through dramatic actions, but through quiet persistence, through attention to detail, through the choices made every day by ordinary people. Awareness, observation, and patience were as powerful as action. Understanding, not control, shaped the city and the people within it. As night approached, he walked through the streets, letting the lanterns guide him. The soft glow illuminated the path, casting shadows that danced gently on the walls. He observed the patterns of light and dark, understanding that even the simplest things could hold lessons for those who noticed. He paused in a quiet alley, listening to the distant sounds of the city, the murmur of voices, the soft clatter of dishes, the faint footsteps of someone passing by. The city was alive, moving in rhythm, carrying stories both seen and unseen. The figure, whoever they were, existed within this rhythm, shaping the invisible currents, yet never disrupting the ordinary flow. He realized that some truths do not require confrontation. Some lessons are learned quietly, through observation, patience, and reflection. Awareness itself becomes a kind of understanding, more lasting and meaningful than any single act of revelation. By the time the moon rose, casting a soft silver light over the city, he had reached the riverbank once more. The water reflected the lanterns and the stars, moving quietly, consistently. He sat and watched, letting the city breathe around him. Life continued, ordinary yet extraordinary in its persistence and subtlety. He knew that the figure would continue to exist, quietly, hidden in the ordinary, shaping events in ways most would never notice. And he also knew that he had carried the most important lesson, that awareness, observation, and patience reveal truths that cannot always be captured but can always be understood. As he rose and walked back into city streets, disappearing into the flow of life around him, he carried a quiet knowledge. Some stories do not end. They live on in the rhythms of ordinary days, in the choices people make, and in the awareness of those who take the time to notice. The city, like life itself, moved forward, shaped by countless small moments, countless unseen currents, and quiet truths that endure beyond sight. The city had changed in ways most people would never notice. Life moved on with its usual rhythms. Merchants opened their shops. Children ran through narrow streets laughing, and citizens went about their daily routines. Yet beneath the ordinary, the echoes of past events lingered, shaping the city in subtle ways. He moved through it quietly, observing, thinking, and understanding that the ordinary carried its own kind of weight. He began his morning by walking through the marketplace. The stalls were filled with fresh bread, fruits, vegetables, and trinkets, and the sounds of haggling and conversation filled the air. He noticed how people moved, how they exchanged glances, how they reacted to small changes in their environment. Every action, no matter how small, was part of a larger pattern, and he had learned to read those patterns carefully. A merchant placed a basket of apples on the counter, adjusting each one so that it appeared orderly. A young boy ran past, nearly knocking over a stack of pottery, but the shopkeeper caught it just in time. These were ordinary moments, yet to him, they held meaning. They were proof that life continued, resilient and adaptive, even after uncertainty had passed through the city like a shadow. He turned into a narrow street, one that had once felt heavy with tension. Now was quiet, bathed in morning light. The shadows stretched along the cobblestones, making the familiar look unfamiliar for a moment. He paused to observe, noting how the light shifted with the movement of the sun, and how the smallest details, an open window, a fluttering curtain, a discarded leaf, carried their own story. As he walked, he reflected on the figure he had once sought, not as someone to catch or confront, but as a presence woven into the city's life, shaping it without being seen. That understanding brought him a sense of peace. It was no longer about fear or urgency. It was about awareness, recognition, and a quiet understanding of human behavior and environment. He reached a small square where a fountain bubbled softly. The water reflected the light in gentle ripples, and children ran around, laughing and chasing each other. Older citizens walked slowly along the edges, speaking softly, moving carefully. The city's ordinary rhythm had returned, yet it carried with it an undercurrent of awareness, lessons learned without words. He noticed patterns in the behavior of people. A woman helped an elderly man step over a puddle. Two merchants exchanged a brief nod before returning to their stalls. A child stopped to tie their shoe, oblivious of the world rushing past. These moments, seemingly small and insignificant, were part of a greater flow, a reflection of how life adapted to the unseen currents that moved through the city. He walked further into the older streets, where buildings leaned slightly toward each other, and the alleys were narrower. The shadows here were long, and the air smelled faintly of earth, stone, and smoke. He paused near a small garden tucked between two buildings. The plants grew quietly, tended with care, though unnoticed by most. It was a reminder that life and awareness could exist in hidden ways, shaping the world subtly. A dog barked in the distance, and he smiled faintly. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life, yet full of meaning. Every small act carried weight, every observation mattered, and every choice left a ripple in the flow of the city. He understood now that life's depth was not always in grand events, but in the ordinary, in the unnoticed, in the patterns that persisted quietly. He moved toward the river, where the water flowed steadily beneath bridges and alongside streets. The reflections of buildings and lanterns danced on the surface, creating patterns that shifted with every ripple. He stopped to watch, thinking about how easily life could be shaped by subtle currents, how presence and awareness could alter outcomes without anyone noticing. People passed by, some hurrying to their destinations, others walking with leisurely steps. He noticed a young man helping a child cross the street, a woman adjusting the cart she was pushing, a pair of friends laughing softly as they moved along. The city was alive, ordinary yet extraordinary in its persistence and quiet complexity. He paused on a bridge, leaning slightly against a railing, and considered the months that had passed. The urgency, the fear, the chase, it had all led to this deeper understanding. He had learned that knowledge and awareness mattered more than confrontation, observation more than capture. Life itself, ordinary and unnoticed, carried the greatest lessons. A soft breeze brought the faint scent of bread from a nearby bakery, mingling with the river air. He inhaled slowly, letting the simplicity of the moment settle in. He thought about the figure, the fear, the whispers of months ago, and realized that their presence had been less about danger and more about revealing truths. The city had adapted, and so had he. He continued walking along the river, passing streets bathed in sunlight, noticing the details that most would ignore. A cat slipped silently between walls. A merchant adjusted a sign. A child dropped a toy and retrieved it carefully. Each ordinary moment reflected the resilience and adaptability of life, and he observed it with quiet attentiveness. By midday, the streets had filled with the sounds of life. Merchants called out prices. Children's laughter echoed, and the hum of conversation created a soft, constant rhythm. He walked through it calmly, aware of patterns, aware of presence, aware of the unseen threads connecting people, actions, and events. He paused near a corner where two streets met, watching a mother guide her child past a puddle, a man lift a crate into a shop, and a woman sweep the steps of her home. Ordinary, yet filled with lessons. Awareness, he realized, was more powerful than any dramatic act. Recognition of subtle truths shaped the city as much as action ever could. Afternoon shadows stretched long, and he moved toward a quiet square where the fountain shimmered in the sunlight. He sat for a moment, letting the noise of the city fade into a background hum. Reflection had become a practice, one that carried understanding deeper than any chase or search ever could. Nearby, life continued with ordinary rhythms. Children played, merchants tended their stalls, passers-by moved quietly through the streets. The city story was ongoing, shaped by countless unnoticed actions, small gestures, and ordinary choices. He realized that the figure, whoever they were, had been part of this narrative, moving through life unnoticed yet leaving subtle impacts. He rose and walked toward the edge of the city, where older streets met the riverbanks. The air here was cooler, carrying scents of water, stone, and earth. He paused to watch the reflections in the river, noticing how light and movement created patterns that were beautiful and complex. He understood that life itself was composed of countless small patterns, invisible yet meaningful. Evening approached, and lanterns began to glow softly along streets and bridges. Shadows moved with the light, creating a quiet dance that echoed the rhythms of life. He walked through the streets calmly, observing, reflecting, and carrying the awareness that some truths are quiet, hidden, and more powerful than any sudden revelation. He paused near a small bridge overlooking the river. The water flowed steadily, reflecting the lanterns and the fading sky. He thought about patience, observation, and understanding, the lessons he had learned and the awareness he now carried. Life, he realized, continued not because of dramatic actions, but because of countless ordinary choices made with attention and care. By nightfall, the city had settled into its rhythm. Lanterns glowed in windows, soft footsteps echoed through alleys, and the river flowed silently beneath the bridges. He walked among it, blending with the ordinary, aware of the currents of life, invisible yet present. He knew that some stories do not end with dramatic conclusions. They continue quietly, shaped by ordinary life, by unseen currents, and by the awareness of those who notice. The figure, the fear, the whispers, they existed still, part of the city's hidden rhythm. And he carried the understanding that observation, patience, and awareness were the greatest tools one could possess. As he disappeared into the streets, becoming part of the ordinary flow of life, he felt the quiet satisfaction of understanding. Some truths are not found in confrontation or capture, but in seeing, noticing, and recognizing the subtle patterns that shape the world. The city, like life itself, moved forward, shaped by countless unseen actions, quiet lessons, and the persistence of ordinary people carrying awareness into each day. The city was alive with movement, though the motions were quiet and almost ordinary. Early morning light stretched across the rooftops, touching the uneven cobblestones below. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, carrying the scent of bread and herbs. He walked slowly, noticing the patterns of life around him, the subtle rhythms that most people pass by without a thought. Merchants began opening their stalls, arranging fruits, vegetables, and pottery with care. A woman carried a basket of laundry down a narrow street, adjusting it carefully as she moved. Children ran between the streets, their laughter carrying softly in the air. Every detail, he realized, held significance, a reflection of ordinary life shaped by countless choices. He paused in a small square where a fountain bubbled quietly. The water reflected the morning sun, sparkling gently as it moved. He watched a young boy drop a small toy and pick it up with care, his mother smiling beside him. These were ordinary moments, yet they carried depth, teaching lessons about patience, attention, and the hidden patterns that make life flow. The figure he had once followed was no longer the focus of fear, but rather a part of the city's hidden rhythm. They had moved through these streets, leaving invisible traces, shaping the awareness of those who noticed without causing panic. He realized now that presence and attention mattered more than confrontation. Observing life closely revealed truths that could not be forced or captured. He continued walking through the streets, moving into areas that had once felt tense and foreboding. Now they were bathed in sunlight, and shadows stretched lazily across walls and alleyways. He noticed small details: a curtain fluttering in a window, a merchant stacking bread carefully, a cat slipping silently between the buildings. Each moment was part of a larger pattern, subtle yet meaningful. A soft breeze carried voices from nearby streets, the chatter of merchants, the calls of children, the hum of daily activity. Life continued in quiet persistence. He thought about the invisible lessons the city had absorbed from past events. Fear had been present, but it had not destroyed life. It had altered awareness, shaped choices, and created a deeper understanding of human behavior. He paused under an archway, watching shadows move along the cobblestones. The interplay of light and dark reminded him of how life itself could be shaped by small, often unseen forces. Not everything that mattered could be observed directly. Much of it existed in the quiet influence of attention and awareness, in the subtle ways people adapted to what they had experienced. Walking further, he noticed the interactions of people around him. A man helped a child step over a puddle. Two friends exchanged a nod before moving on. A woman adjusted her basket as she walked past a stall. Each of these ordinary actions reflected awareness, care, and a continuation of life despite the invisible currents that had once stirred fear and uncertainty. He reached a quiet alley where the buildings leaned closely together, casting long shadows across the ground. The air smelled faintly of stone, earth, and with smoke. A small garden grew tucked between two homes, tended carefully yet unnoticed by passers-by. It reminded him that life often flourished quietly, beyond the notice of most, shaped by care and attention rather than spectacle. A dog barked softly in the distance, and he smiled. Ordinary life carried with it ordinary sounds, yet these sounds connected people to the world around them. They reflected the persistence of daily routines, the subtle ways in which awareness shaped life, and the continuity of ordinary actions that were meaningful when noticed. He moved toward the river, where the water flowed steadily beneath bridges and along the edges of the city. The reflections of buildings and lanterns danced on the surface, shifting with every ripple. He watched carefully, understanding that life itself was composed of countless small patterns, invisible to most yet shaping the flow of daily existence. People passed by, hurrying and lingering in turns, moving with purpose yet reacting to their surroundings in subtle ways. A young man guided a child across the street, a woman adjusted the load she carried, and friends shared a quiet laugh as they moved. The city was alive in ordinary ways, but full of meaning, reflecting resilience and adaptability in every step. He paused on a bridge, leaning against a railing, and reflected on the months of observation, the urgency, the fear, the chase they had led to understanding. He realized that awareness, patience, and observation mattered more than confrontation or control. Life unfolded naturally, and comprehension came not through force, but through quiet attention to ordinary patterns. A gentle breeze brought the scent of baking bread and the faint smell of water from the river. He inhaled slowly, appreciating the simplicity and depth of the moment. He thought of the figure who had moved quietly through the city, not as a threat, but as a presence that revealed truths in subtle ways. The city had endured, adapted, and learned from these invisible influences. He continued walking, noticing details most would overlook. A cat moving silently across a wall, a merchant adjusting a sign, a child retrieving a dropped toy. Each action reflected human intention, patience, and the flow of ordinary life. Patterns existed everywhere, and understanding them required observation and awareness more than direct interaction. By midday, the streets were alive with commerce and conversation. He moved among the crowd, observing, learning, and reflecting on the quiet persistence of life. Awareness, he thought, shaped behavior and influenced outcomes more than fear or pursuit ever could. Ordinary life carried lessons if one took the time to notice them. He paused at the intersection of two streets, watching a mother guide her child past a puddle, a man lift a crate into a shop, and a woman sweep her doorstep. Simple actions, unnoticed by most, yet part of the larger rhythm of life. Awareness, observation, and care mattered deeply, shaping the city in ways most people could not perceive. Afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the cobblestones as he moved to a quiet square where the fountain glimmered. He sat on the edge, listening to the sounds of life around him. Reflection had become a practice, a method for understanding the patterns, intentions, and subtle currents that shaped daily existence. Nearby, life continued in ordinary ways. Children played, merchants tended stalls, and citizens moved quietly through the streets. The city's story unfolded through countless unnoticed actions, subtle gestures, and ordinary choices. The figure, whoever they had been, had moved within this rhythm, influencing life quietly, without disrupting it. He rose and walked toward the river, where the older streets met the water's edge. The air smelled of stone, water, and earth, carrying a sense of quiet calm. He paused to observe the reflections in the river, noticing how the light movement and ordinary life created a tapestry of patterns that were complex, subtle, and beautiful. Evening approached, and lanterns were lit along streets and bridges, casting soft light that mingled with the fading sun. Shadows moved with the glow, creating a quiet dance across walls and cobblestones. He moved among them, blending with the ordinary, observing and reflecting on the ways life continued despite invisible forces and unseen currents. He paused on a small bridge, watching the river flow steadily beneath him. The water reflected lanterns and stars, moving with quiet consistency. He considered the lessons of patience, observation, and awareness. Life endured, shaped by countless ordinary choices and subtle acts of attention, more than by sudden, dramatic interventions. By nightfall, the city settled into its quiet rhythm. Lanterns glowed in windows, soft footsteps echoed along alleys, and the river continued its steady flow. He moved among it all, aware of the hidden patterns and invisible influences, recognizing that some truths exist not in confrontation or capture, but in quiet observation and understanding. He knew that some stories did not end with drama or revelation. They continued quietly, woven into ordinary life, shaped by countless unnoticed actions and subtle awareness. The figure, the fear, and the whispers of the past still existed within the rhythm of the city, and he carried the understanding that observation, patience, and awareness were the most powerful tools for comprehending the world. As he disappeared into the streets, becoming part of the ordinary flow, he felt a sense of satisfaction and peace. Truths often reveal themselves not through action, but through noticing, understanding, and recognizing the subtle currents that shape life. The city, like life itself, moved forward, carried by countless ordinary actions, quiet lessons, and a persistence of human awareness. The city woke slowly, as if still carrying the memory of the night before. The first light of morning touched the rooftops, casting long shadows along narrow streets. Smoke curled from chimneys, mixing with the scent of fresh bread from small bakeries. He moved through these streets quietly, noticing the details that others overlooked. The tilt of a roof tile, the flutter of a curtain in a window, the soft call of a bird from a hidden perch. He paused at the entrance of a marketplace. Merchants were beginning to set up their stalls, arranging fruits, vegetables, and goods in neat patterns. The chatter of buyers and sellers filled the air, creating a rhythm that was ordinary yet alive with subtle movement. A woman passed carrying a basket, adjusting it carefully as she navigated the uneven stones. A child tripped lightly over a cobblestone, but was helped to their feet with gentle care. Each small act reflected the human attention and presence that shaped life quietly. The memory of the figure who had once moved through the city lingered, though no one spoke of it. It was not fear he remembered, but awareness. That presence had left traces, invisible yet enduring, shaping the way people observed their surroundings and interacted with each other. He realized that understanding life was less about confronting events and more about noticing the currents beneath the surface. He walked through streets that had once felt heavy with tension. Now, sunlight poured between buildings, casting patterns of light and shadow that shifted with the passing hours. A cat slipped silently along a wall, a merchant adjusted the goods on a stand, and a man guided a cart carefully through the alley. Ordinary actions, yet full of meaning when observed with attention. He paused near a small fountain where water bubbled softly. Children played nearby, their laughter carrying to the square, while older citizens moved slowly along the edges, speaking in quiet voices. The fountain reflected the sunlight in gentle ripples, and he watched the patterns it created on the surrounding stones. Life, he understood, was composed of countless small movements, each influencing the other in subtle ways. A gentle breeze carried the mixed scents of bread, herbs, and smoke, and he inhaled slowly, letting the ordinary richness of the city settle into his awareness. The invisible lessons of past months felt present here. Patience, observation, and understanding were more powerful than fear or haste. The city had endured, adapted, and learned from unseen influences just as he had. As he moved, he noticed the subtle interactions of people around him. A woman helped an elderly man step over a puddle. Two friends exchanged a nod before moving on. A child stopped to pick up a drop coin. Each moment was ordinary, yet full of intention and care. The city thrived not only through grand acts, but through these small, consistent choices. He continued into narrower streets where the buildings leaned close, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The air carried a faint scent of earth and wood smoke. Between two homes, a small garden grew quietly, tended with care yet largely unnoticed by passers-by. It reminded him that life often flourishes in hidden spaces, shaped by attention and diligence rather than visibility or recognition. A dog barked softly in the distance. The sound reminded him that ordinary life carries its own music, composed of subtle notes, unnoticed rhythms, and ordinary interactions. He watched a young man help a child navigate the street, A woman lift a basket with care. A man adjusts the cart he was pushing. These small acts were proof that life persisted, quietly resilient and deeply interconnected. He moved toward the river, where the water flowed steadily beneath bridges and along the city's edge. Reflections of buildings and lanterns danced upon the surface, changing with every ripple. Life's patterns were visible here in the subtle interactions of light and movement, and he observed them with careful attention. People passed, moving with purpose yet adjusting to their surroundings in tiny, instinctive ways. A merchant nudged a basket slightly to avoid a child. A woman helped a neighbor carry a bundle. Friends exchanged quiet laughter as they walked. The city lived in ordinary ways, yet every ordinary act was meaningful, revealing resilience and attentiveness of those who inhabited it. He paused on a bridge overlooking the river, leaning lightly against a railing. He thought of the months of observation, the fear and uncertainty that had once shaped his days, and the understanding he had gained. Knowledge, patience, and quiet observation mattered more than direct confrontation. Life unfolded in patterns, and the awareness of those patterns offered a deeper understanding than any sudden action could provide. A soft breeze carried the mixed scents of baking bread and flowing water. He breathed slowly, feeling grounded in the ordinary beauty of the city. He reflected on the figure who had moved unseen among the people, not as a threat, but as an invisible influence revealing lessons in subtle ways. The city had learned, and so had he. Walking further, he noticed details that many would overlook. A cat slipping silently across a wall, a merchant adjusting a sign, a child retrieving a dropped toy. Each moment reflected human care, attention, and the quiet persistence of ordinary life. Patterns existed everywhere, but they could only be read by those willing to observe and understand. By midday, the streets were filled with the hum of daily activity. Merchants called out prices, children laughed and ran between streets, and citizens moved in measured steps. He walked among them, reflecting on the quiet persistence of life and how awareness shaped human behavior and outcomes more than fear or drama ever could. He paused at a street corner, observing a mother guiding her child across the street, a man lifting a crate into a shop, and a woman sweeping the steps of her home. Each simple act contributed to the rhythm of life, demonstrating that attention, care, and awareness were the forces that truly shaped the city. Afternoon sunlight stretched shadows across the cobblestones. He moved to a quiet square where the fountain shimmered in the light. He sat, letting the sounds of ordinary life wash over him. Reflection had become a practice, revealing subtle truths about human behavior, patterns, and the invisible currents that shaped daily life. Nearby, life continued with ordinary rhythms. Children played, merchants tended stalls, and citizens moved quietly through the streets. The city's story unfolded through countless unnoticed actions, subtle gestures, and ordinary choices. The figure who had once moved unseen through the city had shaped life subtly, leaving traces that remained long after their presence had vanished. He rose and walked toward the river, where older streets met the water. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of stone, water, and earth. He watched reflections ripple in the river, observing how light movement and ordinary life created patterns that were both complex and quietly beautiful. Evening arrived, and lanterns were lit along the streets, casting soft glows and gentle shadows. The city moved in rhythm, quiet and persistent, shaped by ordinary acts and subtle awareness. He walked among the glow, blending into the ordinary flow, observing and reflecting on the unseen patterns that shaped life. He paused on a small bridge, watching the river flow steadily beneath him. The water reflected lanterns and stars, moving in a steady rhythm. He considered the lessons of patience, observation, and awareness, understanding that life endured not through dramatic events, but through countless small, ordinary acts carried out with attention and care. By nightfall, the city had settled into a calm rhythm. Lanterns glowed softly in windows. Footsteps echoed quietly along alleys, and the river continued its steady course. He moved among it all, aware of hidden patterns and invisible influences, realizing that some truths exist not through confrontation, but through careful observation and quiet understanding. He understood that some stories do not end with dramatic resolution. They continue quietly, woven into ordinary life, shaped by unnoticed acts and awareness. The figure, the whispers, the past fears, they all existed within the rhythm of the city. And he carried with him the knowledge that observation, patience, and awareness are the most powerful tools for understanding the world. As he disappeared into the city streets, part of the ordinary flow, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Truths reveal themselves not through confrontation, but through noticing, understanding, and recognizing the subtle currents shaping life. The city, like life itself, moved forward, shaped by ordinary actions, quiet lessons, and the persistence of human awareness. The city stirred gently under the first light of morning. Smoke curled from chimneys, mixing with the faint scent of fresh bread from nearby bakeries. The streets were quiet at first, but slowly life began to fill them. He moved along the cobblestones, noticing every detail. The angle of a roof, the flutter of a curtain, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Each small thing carried meaning when observed closely. Merchants began setting up their stalls, arranging fruits, vegetables, and wares with care. The hum of conversation rose as buyers haggled quietly over prices. A child ran past, nearly tripping, but an adult gently steadied them. He paused to watch the small interactions, recognizing that ordinary life carried lessons in patience, kindness, and attention to the world around. The memory of the figure who had once moved unseen to the city lingered, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder that presence can shape life quietly, leaving unseen traces. Awareness mattered more than confrontation. Observing the flow of human behavior revealed truths that action alone could not. He wandered through streets that had once felt tense. Now sunlight poured between buildings, casting shifting patterns across the cobblestones. A cat slunk along a wall, a merchant adjusted the placement of goods, and a woman carried a basket carefully down a narrow alley. Each small act contributed to the rhythm of life, unnoticed yet essential. He stopped at a fountain where water bubbled softly, catching the morning sun in gentle ripples. Children played nearby, laughing and chasing one another, while older citizens walked slowly around the edges of the square. Each moment was ordinary, yet filled with meaning for those who took the time to observe. The city itself seemed to breathe quietly, alive in subtle ways. A soft breeze carried the scents of bread, herbs, and water from a river. He inhaled deeply, appreciating the ordinary richness of life around him. Past events had left their mark on the city, but not in destruction. They had altered awareness, shaped patterns, and taught lessons in subtle, lasting ways. He noticed the interactions of people around him. A man helped a child navigate a puddle. Two friends exchanged a quiet nod. A woman picked up a dropped coin. These small, ordinary actions were threads in the larger fabric of life. Life persisted quietly, resilient and adaptive, shaped more by care and attention than by sudden dramatic acts. He moved into narrower streets where buildings leaned closely together, casting long shadows. The air carried the faint scent of stone, wood, and earth. Between two homes, a small garden grew quietly, tended with care but unnoticed by passers-by. Life often flourished in hidden places, sustained by the unseen effort and attention of ordinary people. A dog barked in the distance, and he smiled at the sound. Life carried music in its ordinary noises. The subtle rhythm of footsteps, soft laughter, the gentle bustle of human presence. He watched a young man help a child cross the street, a woman lift her basket carefully, a merchant adjust his cart. Each act, however small, reflected awareness and human care. He approached a river, where water flowed steadily beneath bridges and along the city's edges. The reflections of buildings, lanterns, and passing clouds shimmered on the surface, shifting with every ripple. Life itself seemed composed of countless small movements, each influencing the other in subtle ways. Observing these patterns offered understanding beyond what could be seen at first glance. People moved along the streets, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, adjusting naturally to the world around them. A merchant nudged a basket aside to make room for a child. A neighbor helped carry a bundle. Friends laughed quietly as they passed. The city lived in ordinary ways, yet every ordinary act carried meaning, shaping the environment and the lives within it. He paused on a bridge, leaning lightly against the railing. He reflected on the months of observation, the fear and tension that had once gripped the city, and the understanding he had gained. Knowledge, patience, and careful observation were more powerful than confrontation. Life unfolded naturally, shaped by countless ordinary acts and subtle awareness. A gentle breeze carried the mixed scents of baking bread and flowing water. He breathed deeply, letting the ordinary richness of the city settle into him. The figure who had once moved unseen among the people was not a threat, but a reminder that subtle influence can shape life quietly. The city had endured, adapted, and learned. Walking further, he noticed small details others might miss. A cat slipping silently along a wall, a child retrieving a dropped toy, a merchant adjusting a sign. Every ordinary action reflected care, attention, and the persistence of daily life. Patterns existed everywhere, but only those who observed closely could see and understand them. By midday, the streets were bustling with activity. Merchants called out their goods, children laughed and ran through the alleys, and citizens moved with purpose, yet reacted subtly to their surroundings. He moved among them, understanding that awareness shaped outcomes more than fear or haste ever could. Ordinary life carried its own lessons, if one took the time to notice. He paused at the intersection of two streets, watching a mother guide her child past a puddle, a man lift a crate into a shop, and a woman sweep the steps of her home. Each small act added to the city's rhythm, demonstrating that attention and care matter more than grand gestures. Life persisted through ordinary, unnoticed actions. Afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the cobblestones. He moved to a quiet square where a fountain reflected the light, creating patterns on surrounding stones. He sat for a while, listening to the soft hum of ordinary life. Reflection had become a practice, revealing truths about human behavior and the invisible currents that guided daily life. Nearby, life continued in ordinary ways. Children played, merchants tended stalls, and citizens moved quietly through the streets. The city's story unfolded through countless unnoticed actions and subtle gestures. The figure who had once moved unseen had left traces that continued to shape life, even long after their presence had vanished. He rose and walked toward the river, where older streets met the water. The air was cooler, carrying scents of stone, water, and earth. He watched reflections ripple in the river, observing how movement, light, and ordinary life created patterns both beautiful and quietly complex. Evening approached, and lanterns were lit along the streets, casting soft glows and gentle shadows. The city moved with quiet persistence, shaped by ordinary acts and subtle awareness. He walked among the glow, blending into the ordinary flow, observing and reflecting on the unseen patterns that shaped life. He paused on a small bridge, watching the river flow steadily beneath him. The water reflected lanterns and stars, moving in a steady rhythm. He considered the lessons of patience, observation, and awareness. Life endured not because of dramatic events, but because of countless small, ordinary actions carried out with attention and care. By nightfall, the city had settled into calm rhythms. Lanterns glowed softly in windows, footsteps echoed quietly, and the river continued its steady course. He moved among it all, aware of the hidden patterns and invisible influences, realizing that truths often exist not through confrontation, but through careful observation and quiet understanding. He understood that some stories do not end with dramatic resolutions. They continue quietly, woven into ordinary life, shaped by unnoticed acts and awareness. The figure, the whispers, and past fears remained part of the city's rhythm, and he carried with him the knowledge that observation, patience, and awareness are the greatest tools for understanding the world. As he disappeared into the city streets, part of the ordinary flow, he felt quiet satisfaction. Truths reveal themselves not through confrontation, but through noticing, understanding, and recognizing the subtle currents that shape life. The city, like life itself, moved forward, shaped by ordinary actions, quiet lessons, and the persistence of human awareness. The city began to wake gently under the first pale light of morning. Smoke rose from chimneys, carrying the scent of bread and herbs. He moved carefully through the streets, noticing details that most people passed by without thought. A curtain fluttering in the breeze, the uneven cobblestones beneath his feet, a bird settling on a rooftop. Each small movement reflected the quiet pulse of life that often went unnoticed. Merchants started arranging their stalls, displaying fruits, vegetables, and pottery in neat rows. The soft chatter of buyers and sellers filled the air as the day began. A child ran past, tripping slightly on a stone, but nearby adults steadied them with gentle hand. He paused to observe, understanding that ordinary moments like these carried their own lessons in patience, kindness, and human awareness. The memory of the figure, who had once moved quietly through the city lingered, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder that invisible influence could shape life subtly, leaving traces long after the event had passed. Observation mattered more than confrontation, and noticing patterns in daily life revealed truths that action alone could not uncover. He wandered through streets that had once felt tense and oppressive. Now, sunlight streamed between buildings, casting shifting patterns across the cobblestones. A cat slipped along a wall, a merchant adjusted the placement of goods, a woman carried a basket carefully down an alley. Each small act contributed to the rhythm of life, creating a complex pattern invisible to those who did not pay attention. At a small fountain, water bubbled gently, catching the sunlight in sparkling ripples. Children played nearby, laughing and chasing each other, while older citizens moved slowly along the edges of the square. Each ordinary moment carried depth for those who chose to observe. Life itself seemed to breathe quietly through these patterns, resilient yet full of nuance. A soft breeze brought the scents of bread herbs and the river nearby. He breathed deeply, feeling the ordinary richness of life settle around him. The past, though filled with moments of fear and uncertainty, had left lessons rather than scars. The city had adapted, grown more aware, and learned to carry forward in quiet resilience. He observed the small interactions of people around him. A man helped a child step over a puddle. Two friends exchanged a quiet nod. A woman retrieved a dropped coin. Each action was minor, yet together they created the steady rhythm of human existence. Life persisted through ordinary gestures of care and attention, more than through grand acts or dramatic interventions. He continued into narrower streets where buildings leaned closely together, casting long shadows. The air carried faint scents of wood, stone, and earth. Between two homes, a small garden grew quietly, tended with care, hidden from most passers-by. Life often flourished quietly in hidden spaces, nurtured by diligence and observation rather than recognition or spectacle. A dog barked softly in the distance, and he smiled at the ordinary sound. Life's music existed in these subtle notes, the rhythm of footsteps, soft laughter, the hum of daily interactions. He watched a young man help a child across the street, a woman adjust her load carefully, a merchant shift his cart. Each act, however small, reflected attentiveness and human care. He reached the river, where water flowed steadily beneath bridges and along the edges of the city. Reflections of buildings, lanterns, and passing clouds shimmered on the surface, changing with every ripple. Life itself was a collection of countless small movements, each influencing the other in ways that were often invisible but significant. Observing these patterns offered understanding beyond what could be seen at first glance. People moved along the streets, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, adjusting naturally to the world around them. A merchant nudged a basket aside for a child. A neighbor helped carry a bundle. Friends laughed quietly as they walked. Ordinary life carried meaning in every step, shaping the city and the people within it. He paused on a bridge, leaning lightly against a railing. Reflection had become a daily practice, helping him understand the rhythms of human life. The city had endured, adapted, and thrived, shaped by countless ordinary actions and subtle awareness. Knowledge, patience, and careful observation mattered more than confrontation or haste. A soft breeze carried the mixed scents of baking bread and flowing water. He inhaled deeply, feeling grounded in the ordinary beauty around him. The figure who had once moved unseen through the city was not a threat, but a subtle presence, teaching lessons without words. The city, and those who lived within it, had learned to carry on quietly yet attentively.